residents there voted for a new mayor in a runoff election. It was a more tough on crime candidate versus a progressive, and the progressive in this race won. Brandon Johnson won after Lori Lightfoot became the first mayor in 4 decades to not win a re-election. And Johnson is a progressive. He's backed by Bernie Sanders, and he said he wants to defund the police. But according to Chicago police, homicides are at a 25-year high, so Johnson is going to have a lot on his plate when he takes office.
All right, thank you very much, Logan Raddick. And here to talk more about the Chicago mayoral race, retired Chicago police lieutenant and attorney John Garrido, and spokesperson for the National Police Association, retired Chicago area police officer Betsy Brantner Smith. I wanted to, if we could get to the numbers we have here on crime in Chicago that Logan touched on, if we could bring up that full screen to show where crime stands after 4 years of watching what Lori Lightfoot did. Take a look at the numbers. Murders up 59%, shootings up 43%, robbery up 27%. And Betsy, this is a situation in which you had somebody that wanted to fund the police running against somebody that wanted to defund the police, and the defunder won. What do you think the consequence will be here?
Well, I think the consequence with Brandon Johnson is probably going to be more of the same progressive policies that Lori Lightfoot had. But here's the thing. Brandon Johnson did run on, what he calls, social reforms. And again, he calls himself a communist. That's why Bernie Sanders campaigned for him. Elizabeth Warren, some of the squad came in and campaigned for him. He did say that he is going to try to promote more Chicago police detectives so that they can help deal with the lousy clearance rate that we have with all the violent crime. But we're going to see. And I think what's going to be very telling with Brandon Johnson is who he brings in or promotes from inside for superintendent. We will see. If he brings in an extremely progressive reform kind of superintendent, then the Chicago Police Department and the people of Chicago are going to know that it's going to be more progressive policies, which tends to lead to more violent crime.
Yeah, John, you're a retired Chicago police lieutenant, but you're also an attorney. Do you see crime going down, especially with how progressives tend to be so soft on crime? Just continuing what Betsy was saying.
No, boy, I tell you, Chicago voters never fail to disappoint. We, in 2019, when we had to make a decision, we thought we were picking the lesser of two evils with Lori Lightfoot. And obviously, we see how that turned out. And now we've doubled down on that and gone even further left. Brandon Johnson is a product of the Chicago Teachers Union. His boss is basically Tony Preckwinkle. And the frustrating and disappointing thing, I guess I would say, is that officers were hopeful. Paul Vallis was talking about how he was going to do an audit of the command staff that's there now to make sure that those that are in positions of power actually deserve to be there and have the experience to be there. And we don't see that happening now under Brandon Johnson. It's true, we're going to have to see who he does promote to put in that position as the superintendent. But I will say this. We are holding out a glimmer of hope because there's still up to 90,000 mail-in ballots that have not been counted yet. And there is a very, very distant chance here that Paul Vallis could still pull it out. So.
Okay. Now, Betsy, you, I think, spent 29 years in a suburb of Chicago. So the dynamics of suburbs versus a city, an urban area like Chicago, usually it's a different kind of quality of life, a different experience. But I'm kind of curious, from your perspective, that you've watched that city for years and years. What do you think they're doing wrong, and what is the solution?
Well, the solution is you've got to put criminals in prison. That's really the only answer. Under the Lightfoot regime, we saw her. She so poorly handled the gang crime in Chicago. She so poorly handled the pandemic, the George Floyd riots. Chicago, and of course, John can talk about this, but you always knew in Chicago that there were certain neighborhoods you didn't go to as a visitor or a tourist But so much of Chicago was a very, very safe and wonderful city. And really, Lori Lightfoot did a heck of a job destroying so much of that, the shopping districts and the residential districts. I always talk about this. I'm so grateful that my youngest child was able to move out of Chicago a year ago because I was so worried about her all the time. And when you talk about the suburbs, we're seeing a creep into the suburbs, a creep west and south of the crime that you see in Chicago. It's coming out to the suburbs. And you know what the suburbs are doing? We're all hiring Chicago cops away from the Chicago Police Department.
All
and
right.
that's going to be a problem if that continues.
All right, John, we're just about out of time. Got to say goodbye. Just final thoughts, real quick.
I mean, really, it's just going to come down to who he puts in for leadership to try to boost morale for our officers. And unfortunately, sadly, I don't see that happening. And if that doesn't happen, officers are going to continue to leave. And I'm sorry, but crime is just going to continue to increase.
All right, John Garrido, Betsy Brantner-Smith, thank you.